share with you guys one of my favorite little supply hacks. And this is something that I do when I'm in a pinch, or if I can't find my watercolors, or if I'm just looking to mix up my supplies in a different way. And that is to use water-based markers. So kids markers, coloring book markers, any kind of marker that is not permanent is going to work. Now you might have to experiment a little bit to see what happens with different brands, but if you scribble on a page and add water, you're going to turn that scribble into pigment that you can use, which means you can add water to all those scribbles and get this really cool, colorful background that has a little bit of texture to it. It's a little bit like watercolor pencils. There's some watercolor markers out there too that will do the same thing, but they're actually really expensive. So grabbing just some basic Crayolas or your kids' markers is such a fun way to create this really colorful, interesting background that has some texture in there. And you can see that my background has dried and it looks a lot like a wash, a watercolor wash. But I really tried to hold on to some of those scribbles here and there. And when those backgrounds dry, I love to use them to draw or paint over the top of. They make a really, really great background for mixed media art. So I am using golden acrylic high fluid paint in black, and it's a little bit like the consistency of ink, but a little bit thicker. And I really enjoy using this on a variety of different surfaces because it's kind of like it works on just about anything. Sometimes India ink or some inks, they might not work so well on different surfaces, like if it's a waxy surface or something that's maybe too built up and textural. But I have found that the high flow acrylics that Golden makes feel and look a lot like ink, but you can go over the top of anything with them, just like you can with acrylic paint. So I am using that, the acrylic high flow paint, as well as one of my favorite black velvet round brushes. And they're really, really nice, middle of the road synthetic brushes that you can use for a variety of different things, but I like using them to create these ink drawings or these feelings of ink drawings. So I am basically dipping that brush into my high flow acrylics and painting these designs with it. I'm keeping my designs really simple. It's a little bit more of a doodling style. But my goal in a page like this is A, to experiment with those markers and that color and really have fun with my simple supplies. And B, it's also to create something that looks and feels a little bit more like pattern. Now that's the way I like to work in my art journal or my sketchbook, is to create these spreads that have the feel of pattern. I like to experiment with pattern. Obviously, I love floral patterns a lot. That's kind of my thing. But I tend to cover my entire surface. And I do a lot of repeating of my designs. So you can see that I've got the same type of flower repeated across my spread. I've pulled in other shapes and different types of flowers that I repeat throughout that space. And I'm really just working my way across the surface, trying to fill in that space and create that illusion or that look and feel of pattern. Now, something you have to keep in mind if you are using ink or acrylic high flow paint to quote unquote draw with, it can be a little intimidating. It's permanent. I did not sketch anything out first. So you have to kind of get accustomed to taking a risk and using that black paint without anything to follow. So I'm working off the top of my head, but if you're uncomfortable with that, you could definitely sketch it out in pencil first. Because I love layers and I love push and pull of contrast, the last step for me in a spread like this is to go back in with a little bit of white paint. The use of white, the color white or the color black for me are the easiest ways to add really quick contrast where things begin to kind of pop off a page or create this push and pull between that color in the background and the designs in the foreground or that top layer. So I'm just going in, this time around I'm just using white acrylic paint, just cheap old craft paint, just to add a little bit of white to some of those darker areas. So those blue blotches of color, I've added white to. I added white to some of those leaves. I love using dots and marks within space to fill that space up. So I'm adding those here and there. Again, my goal in something like this, first and foremost, is to just express myself and have fun practicing and working in my art journal page. But my other goal is to really create an interesting surface that's got a lot of color, a lot of push and pull and interest. So even if I'm using colors or designs that are a little bit more simple and basic, with that push and pull, with the color choices, with filling space, I'm able to create a little bit more of an elevated look and feel with stuff that's simple. My very last step is to just use some of those markers here and there to add a little touch of color in some of that space. This is a really fun way to experiment with simple supplies. I always like to tell people that you do not need lots of money or fancy or trendy supplies in order to create something unique or beautiful or colorful. Oftentimes it's just getting familiar with all kinds of different supplies, even the simple ones, even kids supplies, you can use to your benefit, work on a budget and create something really beautiful and interesting while having fun at the same time. So I hope that this encourages you guys to go out there, maybe grab some cheapo supplies, see how far you can push them, see how you can apply them to your own process and your own work.